Welcome everyone joining. Now I see it. There's a lag, but whatever. I'm Zach, and this is
Market?
Marcus Davies. He's the producer. We're just gonna go through some things on the experience of this music project. And Marcus here was one of the first, actually the first person I reached out to, and just like throwing this idea. Hey, want to be part of this? After a long discussion, said yes. He said yes. And yeah, went through some strife through freaking COVID, right? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, we'll kind of just talk about skip all the stuff in the beginning, and just kind of cut towards digging into the figuring out how to get this 60 sound and really get into the molecular level of what we're looking for, the specifics, kind of your end. Tell us about that.
Oofda. Yeah. Well, that's a good challenge because when you learn how to make records, you're always learning in like a modern way. And sure, they kind of teach you about history and stuff, but you just kind of learn it and then gloss over it, and then just hop into making records in a modern way with modern tools. That was kind of the biggest challenge, was that it's mostly a mental switch. So if we're trying to emulate the '60s, you got to think the way that they were trying to think in the '60s, and part of that is, okay, what were their like technological limitations? Did they only have 4 tracks, 8 tracks, 16, something like that? They were using tape. They only had X amount of microphones, gear, stuff like that. So that's kind of the biggest thing, is once we decided what studio we were going to be at, then we can look at the tools that we have at our disposal. Like tape is a big thing. Like we don't have tape, and that's not in the budget. That's such an expensive way to go. So, okay, we have to use Pro Tools, but okay, we have these mics. How are we going to set them up? We got to try to mimic exactly what they did. We can do that. That's easy. And then still going from there. Like even in the mixing stage, you don't want to use these super fancy EQs. Like you don't want to use a fat filter EQ. You want to use an Abbey Road EQ,
Yeah.
because they're obviously not getting too surgical back in the day. So you're trying to, again, think the way they had fixed EQ positions. So we're going to go with that. I don't want to use this full entire bandwidth thing. But yeah, it's and then also something like, not using a click, which I know you use that for.
Being the drummer.
Yeah, oh man.
But
I never hesitated at first.
after the second day, got used to it.
Yeah, yeah. That was just the first thing in my mind. I'm like, all right, there's no way they had a click, so there's no way we're going to use a click. Everybody plays to the drummer. So things like, and like letting things be wrong, so to speak. Letting that nuance of performance in there. They're not chopping it up. They're not doing multiple takes for each little part, each section. They're playing the songs all the way through live in one room. It's just about that mentality and that kind of approach. So that's what they did. That's what we're going to do.
Yeah. Plus with that no click, letting the drummer play. In this post-recording, I want to get to this eventually, but that honestly did it justice in trying to emulate the sound in this not straightforward on the tempo drum fills. Seem like they're definitely off tempo, but it works super well with the singers singing on top of it, which if anyone's listening, go take a listen to it. It was freaking dope when I heard it.
Yeah, that's the whole thing of the '60s. They're not making it perfect, and in that sense, that's what makes it perfect. If we try to do it, in that modern approach of putting everything on the grid, it never would have sounded there. Even if whether or not we were using tape, it just wouldn't matter. We would have been wrong right from the jump.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of that, what playbook did you use to guide yourself in this process?
A playbook. I wish there was a playbook. Honest, there's no really good answer because it's so, when it comes to producing, it's so project specific on what that project needs. The best thing is really just looking at what they did. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're literally kind of mimicking as best as we can with the tools that we have. YouTube has been a great resource. See, there's some old school recording books out there. So luckily it was all pretty well documented, as far as like what they did, what they could do. So it's kind of take that, doing as much as we can. Like we're not recording at Abbey Road or Capitol Studios or nothing like that. We don't have these big massive rooms. So we're trying to like, okay, how can we still get that big massive room sound with what we do have? So it's identifying what it is, looking at what we have, and coming up with what we can do to get that result.
Yeah. And for me, why I went to someone, and you in particular, because obviously college mates, for those who don't know, I could only describe what I hear. I'm no producer student. Took one class, but that does not make me for production, no, not a producer or sound engineer in the least. So kind of leading into your job as this liaison between me and Tiki, and then maybe talk about Tiki and as your choice and through this process.
Yeah, Tiki. He is the recording engineer. He's also been mixing. So he's been doing all the operating, all the technical stuff. And he's the guy that we went to school with. So I've actually gone to him in the past when I had too many projects on my plate and I had to give them off. I know Tiki was a super busy guy as well. And he's done a lot of projects, so he had experience pretty early on making records. So I knew that he's kind of been my go-to guy if there's something I can't do on the engineering side. So when Zach reached out to me to be the producer, that means I'm pretty hands-off on the technical side of things. So I know how Tiki works and kind of how he flows, so I can kind of really communicate with him pretty well. And it comes in handy being an engineer myself, so I can really tell him, like when it comes to mix notes, I could tell him, all right, 2 dB F10K needs to come down or something.
Yeah.
So I can get with the two, but it's been really great having him on board. Plus, he has a studio, so it kind of worked out that we could just record at his place. We don't have to look at, going somewhere else, and we can leave things set up at his place overnight if we need to, things like that. That's been really handy.
Oh, yeah. So, what to me it was always comical because when I talk to you, I'm using such drummer terms, and you're a musician yourself. You play bass, guitar, so you can speak on the musician's behalf and then explain in technical terms to Tiki what to do. Mm-hmm. What are some of those, like push pull, right, or bounce, and what are some terms that you can think of off the top of your head?
Yeah. It's tough, but luckily with Tiki being a good engineer, from the start, I've had a lot of conversations with him, and we have had conversations, and me and him have had conversations. I'm just kind of relaying that information in a way that he can really understand, and I get really technical with it. But from the start, I kind of know that he knows what we're looking for. So once we kind of dial in, pretty much rough tones, then I can really take a step back. And then I can listen to Isaac, playing guitar, and I'm listening for more reverb, and I'll just run out to the studio and turn reverb up on the amp or the pedal that we were using. I can't remember what we did.
Yeah, mostly amp, I think.
Yeah, and Tiki's good on levels and things like that as we start recording. But so he's having another engineer there has really freed me up to really be able to bounce between both worlds, but mainly staying in the producer world and dealing with you guys in the room, and less about what's happening on the board.
Yeah.
Yeah.